All right, so picking up kind of just a review of the Korah chapter. This is on my page 166. This is chapter 39. And I had marked this first passage here because I think it's interesting that Korah paid recognition to the fact that there was something special between Reverend Whitfield and Addie, okay, even though she doesn't know that they had a physical relationship, all right, but she does pay attention to that. All right, then we see also on page 167 how Korah really approves of Reverend Whitfield. She says he's a godly man if one ever breathed. You know, very ironic because we know that Reverend Whitfield was involved in this, you know, adulterous affair with Addie, okay? Then we see that Korah is saying that really the only sin that she feels that Addie ever committed was being partial to Jewel, and Jewel never loved her, and it was his own punishment, okay? And then we talked a little bit about this passage where Addie says that, you know, he is my cross, meaning Jewel, and he will be my salvation. He will save me from the water and from the fire. Even though I have laid down my life, he will save me. Kind of prophesizing that when she is dead, he will save her body. All right, and he has saved her body from the river that was flooded. And so we have kind of a little bit of foreshadowing that he could be saving it from the fire in the future. All right. We also talked a little bit about some of these connections to the Odyssey and how Agamemnon tells the story of his own death in the Odyssey, which is where we get the title. As I lay dying, the woman with the dog's eyes would not close my eyes for me as I descended into Hades. All right, and he is watching his own descent into hell, just kind of like Addie is, you know, narrating her own death and her own, you know, journey back home. You know, we see the parallel between Elphenor and he was Odysseus' friend who fell off of a roof and died, and Cash has fallen off of a roof. You know, the Odyssey is a quest, and As I Lie Dying is kind of an ironic quest. We started reading the Addie section, and she hates her students. The only time that she is happy is when she's beating them or switching them. She feels like, you know, when she is spanking her students or switching them for, you know, them having some sort of an indiscretion, that is the moment that her students and she have the connection that they feel like a joining there. She meets Anne's. He, you know, kind of courts her back and forth. It's not romantic. You know, he ends up, you know, asking her to marry him or whatever. They talk about how she doesn't have any people, but she does have people. They're all in the cemetery. All right, and she says that she never knew it any other way. Okay, more of those references to, you know, kind of death. And then she decides she marries Anne's, and then she has Cash. And when she has Cash, she knows that living is horrible, and that her father was right, and that, you know, the only reason we live is so we can stay dead for a long time. And she then moves in, and she starts talking about words, and how words were invented by people who never fully experienced those same emotions. All right, and so we're going to pick up here at page 172, right here, where, you know, Anne's has been talking about love, and she says, you know, that Anne's had a word, he called it love, but, you know, I didn't need to say it to Cash, Cash didn't need to say it to me. Anne's could say it if he wanted, but, you know, whatevs. All right, I would think that even while I lay with him in the dark and Cash asleep in the cradle within the swing of my hand, I would think if he were to awake and cry, I would suckle him too. Anne's or love, it didn't matter. My aloneness had been violated and then made whole again by the violation. Time, Anne's, love, what you will, outside the circle. Then I found that I had Darl. At first, I would not believe it. Then I believed I would kill Anne's. So she found out she was pregnant with Darl, and she's like, no way. And then she's like, well, I'm going to kill him. All right. It was as though he had tricked me. Hidden within a word, like within a paper screen, and struck me in the back through it. But then I realized that I had been tricked by words older than Anne's or love, and that the same word had tricked Anne's too, and that my revenge would be that he would never know I was taking revenge. Okay, so I'm asking you here, what is her revenge? She says her revenge is that he's not even going to know she's doing it.
Basically, not letting him know it's just a kid.
Okay. Any other ideas of what her revenge could possibly be? Okay. Anything else? Cheating on him? Okay, so far, you know, what did you say, MJ?
I said, no. I said something about not letting him see
Okay, not letting him know that it's his kid. Really?
Crazy.
Are you paying attention?
Yeah, you're talking about somebody's kid.
All right, Jewel, showing favoritism or partisanship to Jewel. All right, someone said the affair. All right, she elaborates on it. She tells us exactly what her revenge is in a minute. And when Darrell was born, I asked Ann's to promise to take me back to Jefferson when I died. Because I knew that Father had been right, even when he couldn't have known he was right any more than I could have known I was wrong. So what is her revenge? She wants Anne's to do what? Bury her in Jefferson. Not with him, with her people. That's her revenge. And so she sees this as getting revenge against him, even though he doesn't recognize that. Cool? All right. Nonsense, Anne says. You and me ain't nigh done chapping yet with just 2. We just got 2 kids. You got plenty of life left in you. He did not know that he was dead then, like to her. Sometimes I would lie by him in the dark, hearing the land that was now of my blood and flesh, and I would think, Anne's? Why Anne's? Why are you Anne's? I would think about his name until after a while I could see the word as a shape, a vessel, and I would watch him liquefy and float into it like cold molasses flowing out of the darkness into the vessel, until the jar stood full and motionless, a significant shape profoundly without life, like an empty door frame. And then I would find that I had forgotten the name of the jar. I would think, the shape of my body, where I used to be a virgin, is in the shape of a... She leaves it blank. And I couldn't think Anne's. Couldn't remember Anne's. It was not that I could think of myself as no longer unvirgin, because I was 3 now. When she says she was 3, she means her, Cash, and Darrell. And when I would think Cash and Darrell that way until their names would die and solidify into a shape and then fade away, I would say, all right, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they call them. All right? So here, it's like she's thinking, what is in a name? Who is this person? Who has made him this person? And so when Cora Tall would tell me I was not a true mother, I would think how words go straight up in a thin line, quick and harmless, and how terribly doing goes along the earth clinging to it, so that after a while the 2 lines are too far apart for the same person to straddle from one to the other, and that sin and love and fear are just sounds that people who have never sinned nor loved nor feared have for what they never had and cannot have until they forget the words, like Cora, who could never even cook. So then she throws some shade on Cora's cooking. She's like, so Cora, she was worried about my sin and my salvation, but she couldn't cook, so... She would tell me what I owed to my children and to Anne's and to God. I gave Anne's the children. I did not ask for them. I did not even ask him for what he could have given me. Not Anne's. Not him. That was my duty to him, to not ask that, and that duty I fulfilled. I would be I would let him be the shape and echo of his word. That was more than he asked, because he could not have asked for that and been Anne's, using himself so with a word. And then he died. He did not know that he was dead. So he died like to her. Did y'all see that? Mm-hmm. All right. I would lie by him in the dark, hearing the dark land, talking of God's love and his beauty and his sin, hearing the dark voicelessness in which the words are the deeds, and the other words that are not deeds, that are just the gaps in people's lacks, coming down like the cries of the geese out of the wild darkness in the old terrible nights, fumbling at the deeds like orphans to whom are pointed out in a crowd 2 faces and told, that is your father, your mother. I believed that I had found it. I believed that the reason was the duty to the alive, to the terrible blood, the red bitter flood boiling through the land. I would think of sin as I would think of the clothes we both wore in the world's face, of the circumspection necessary because he was he and I was I. The sin more utter and terrible since he was the instrument ordained by God who created the sin to sanctify that sin he had created. So who's she talking about now? Who is Addie talking about here? Who did she sin with? Whitfield. All right? So here she is sinned with Whitfield. And so in her mind, the sin is more utter and terrible since he was the instrument ordained by God who created the sin, because he's a preacher. All right? So it's almost worse that she's sinning with him because he's the preacher. Are y'all with me? Okay? But she's trying to figure out, how to be alive, because she just feels kind of, ugh. All right, while I waited for him in the woods, waiting for him before he saw me, I would think of him as dressed in sin. All right, so we have a parallel here. Who else waited for a minister in the woods?
The girl in the scarlet letter.
Yeah, the girl in scarlet letter, Hester.
I don't know how I did that.
All right, and the woods are kind of an archetype, kind of a story pattern. In the scarlet letter, they viewed the woods as being the place where the devil lived, right? Where sin took place. You know, the woods were a dark, scary place that was very unknown, okay? So, you know, they're meeting here in this unknown place, and they're also, you know, sinning here. So we're seeing some kind of story parallels, but, you know, an archetype is a story pattern as well. And so the idea of the woods as being dark and scary and, you know, full of the unknown is just something that's generally always been kind of recognized in literature. Okay? I would think of him as thinking of me as dressed also in sin. He the more beautiful, since the garment which he had exchanged for sin was sanctified, because he is a man of the cloth. I would think of the sin as garments which we would remove in order to shape and coerce the terrible blood to the forlorn echo of the dead world high in the air. Then I would lay with Anne's again. I did not lie to him. I just refused, just as I refused my brush to Cash and Darl after their time was up, hearing the dark land talking the voiceless speech. What is she refusing to Anne's? She's refusing, you know, relations, marital relations. All right? So she's having an affair with Whitfield, and while she's doing that, she says, I didn't lie. You know, I didn't say anything about it. I didn't lie. But I also didn't give myself to my husband during this time. All right? I hid nothing. I tried to deceive no one. I would not have cared. I merely took the precautions that he thought necessary for his sake, not my safety. So, you know, she didn't hide anything, but she, you know, kept it on the DL because he was the preacher. All right? But just as I wore clothes in the world's face, and I would think then when Cora talked to me of how the high dead words and time seemed to lose even the significance of their dead sound. Then it was over. Over in the sense that he was gone, and I knew it. See him again though I would never again see him coming swift and secret to me in the woods, dressed in sin like a gallant garment, already blowing aside with the speed of his secret coming. But for me it was not over. I mean, over in the sense of beginning and ending, because to me there was no beginning nor ending to anything then. I even held Anne's refraining still. So what is she doing here? The relationship with Whitfield's over, but what is she holding Anne's refraining mean?
She still feels that type of way.
Yeah, she's still like not having that marital relationship, that physicality with him. Okay? Not that I was holding him recessional, but as though nothing else had ever been. My children were of me alone, of the wild blood boiling along the earth, of me and of all that lived, of none and of all. Then I found that I had Jewel. When I waked to remember to discover it, he was 2 months gone. So what is she saying about this? She's 2 months pregnant. So when she realized she was pregnant, she was 2 months pregnant. But during this time of the affair and subsequently, she has not had a dotted line relationship with Anne's. So she's pregnant. So what should he know? All right? My father said that the reason for living is getting ready to stay dead. Because, you know, he was a really positive person like Addie. I knew at last what he meant. And they could have not have known what he meant himself. Because a man cannot know anything about cleaning up the house afterward. And so I have cleaned my house. What does that mean, I have cleaned my house? What does that mean?
She got rid of all the seeds.
Okay. Yeah, it's like she's put her affairs in order so that she can die now. All right? With Jewel, I lay by the lamp, holding up my own head, watching him cap and suture it before he breathed. The wild blood boiled away, and the sound of it ceased. So all of those feelings that she had, those wild feelings, they've ceased now with Jewel's birth. Then there was only the milk, warm and calm, and I lying calm in the slow silence, getting ready to clean my house, to prepare to die. All right, so she's got some work to do so she can be done. All right. I gave Ann's Dewey Dell to negative Jewel. All right, so she has Cash, she has Darrell, she has Jewel. She gives Dewey Dell to negative Jewel. A positive and a negative together is going to make 0. All right. Then I gave him Vardaman plus 1.
0, that just makes positive.
Well, to replace the child I had robbed him of. And now he has 3 children that are his and not mine. So she doesn't count Jewel as being part of his children. That's hers. Okay? And then I could get ready to die. One day I was talking to Cora. She prayed for me because she believed I was blind to sin, wanting me to kneel and pray too, because people to whom sin is just a matter of words, to them salvation is just words too. All right? So, Addie, not a pleasant person.
So she just thinks that Cora's just kind of
She says she feels like Cora, all the things that Cora says about sin and salvation are just words that are meaningless. All right, so in chapter 39, what areas of religion did Cora and Addie have arguments about?
You mean like sin?
Yes, sin and salvation. They had arguments about what is sin and what is salvation. And what does Addie say that horrifies Cora? No, who does she say is going to be her salvation? Jewel. And Cora's like, you can't choose who your salvation is. That's not your choice. All right, and so in chapter 40, how did Addie feel about being a school teacher? She hated it. How did she feel about words such as love and motherhood and sin? Yeah, she didn't need to use them. They're just words invented by people who'd never really felt those emotions. And what secret does she reveal? She had an affair, and Jewel's father is Reverend Whitfield. And it explains her behavior and why her relationship is the way it is with Jewel and why she's partial to him. And why doesn't Addie take Cora's talk about religion too seriously?
because she thinks that it's just words.
Just words that mean nothing. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this previously, how Dimsdale and Whitfield, how we have some comparisons that a dale is a fertile valley and a field is where you grow crops. All right, one's dark, one's bright. We have 2 children, both with names that have similar connotations, Pearl and Jewel. Both were ministers. They both met up in the field. They both had trouble confessing. Met in the forest, excuse me. All right. So Whitfield hears that Addie is dying, and he's like, I got to go and tell. I've got to confess. This has to happen. So he heads out. He sees that the bridge is gone, and he's like, oh gosh, hopefully the Lord can keep me safe. The Lord kept him safe. He was able to cross the bridge. He says, I know now forgiveness is mine. I was able to circumvent this flood, and I'm going to make it. I'm going to walk up to him, and I'm going to say, Anne, I have sinned. Do with me what you will. But he doesn't, because when he reaches Tull's house, his youngest daughter comes out and says she has already died. And so he was like, well, that was a sign from God that I didn't need to confess. Okay? So he says, God's grace upon this house. So in chapter 41, what struggle has Whitfield been having that has him on this journey? And that is a confession. Okay? And when he finds out that Addie has already died, what conclusion does Whitfield reach regarding his journey? That he doesn't need to confess. And how do you feel about that? Yeah, making excuses, just like, we have seen Anne's making excuses for his behavior. We've seen Dewey Dale making excuses for her behavior. Again, making excuses. Okay, so in this Darrell chapter, the next one, we find out that Cash has been really hurt. What has happened to him? His leg is broken again. Also, it looks like Jewel's horse has probably kicked him in the stomach. So what do they do with Cash? Where do they put him? On top of Addie's coffin. All right, so that's another element of that whole Southern Gothic idea. All right, so, he's hurt. Darrell, what is he still worried about? His tools, okay? So they have shown up at this man Armstead's house, and he has offered them some things. What has he offered? For him to stay overnight. What else? Food. What else? Like they've used his mules to get the wagon to his house. Y'all see that? Because their mules drowned. So they had to get their wagon to his house. So they've used his mules. So, there is a discussion about continuing to borrow his mules. All right? So Armstead offers them to come in to clean up. He offers them his team. Ans refuses to go in. He just stays outside. And they have laid Cash on top of this coffin, and it looks like his leg is broken. It's just a terrible, terrible mess. So in the Armstead chapter, what major problem to continuing this journey do they discuss?
Cash.
There's no mules. Yeah, no mules left. Okay? And what is wrong with Cash? His leg's broken. What is he still the most concerned about? His tools. And what problem does the heat of the day cause? The rotting of the body to exacerbate and to stink. And what ever-present reminder of this problem shows back up? The buzzards. All right, so what does Ans do that angers Jewel? Huh? Okay, so Armstead has offered them to borrow his mules, but they're like, Ans just says no. But he wants to do something that is upsetting to Jewel. Ans does. What does Ans want to do that's upsetting to Jewel?
I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
See, I should have said.
He wants to sell his horse. So why does Ans want to sell Jewel's horse?
Because of his. I believe that. It's because of his teeth.
Okay, what have they lost? Mules. So he wants to sell Jewel's horse so that he can use some of that money to put together with some other things that he has, and he also is going to mortgage everything he owns so he can buy some mules. Yes?
I know the American blood sugar as well.
Yes. Okay. So, do you need somebody to walk with you?
No, I'm
Probably. It's been like 2 years.
Will you walk with her?
Oh my god.
Really? I thought you
I would walk with her?
I did not.
All right. So anyway, Ans wants to sell Jewel's horse because if he mortgages everything that he owns, and his stuff is pretty sorry, but if he mortgages everything he owns, if he puts it up against the bank for collateral, and he sells Jewel's horse, and he takes the little bit of money he has put back for his teeth, then maybe he can get some mules and get Addie to Jefferson. And so when he reveals this plan, what does Jewel do with his horse? Huh? He takes off. He takes off on his horse. He has let Ans ride his horse over to Snopes' farm where he's originally got that horse to talk to him about getting some mules. But now, when it comes down to it, Jewel takes off on the horse. All right? He's very upset because he was wanting to get that team from Snopes. All right, who does Armstead sympathize with? Jewel.
Which bundle stays inside? I mean, stays outside.
Ans. What do you mean?
It has to do for protection.
What does Ans do that angers Jewel?
No, the witch vendor refuses to go into Armis's house to eat, then what does he do?
Oh, Ans, he hangs around the barn. Yeah. Stays outside. All right, so in the chapter 44, the Bardaman chapter, All right. He says, now there are 7 of them in little tall black circles. And we listed the family members, and there's 7 of them. Okay, so there's an interesting parallel there between the buzzards and the members of the family. And what is Vardaman interested in? You know, dealing with these buzzards. Huh? What does he want to know about them? He wants to know something about these buzzards. What is that something? Okay. He wants to know where they go at night. All right. He's like, where do they go at night? All right. And so he's saying, I wouldn't let him light on her. I wouldn't let him light on Cash either. What does that mean? I wouldn't let him light on her. I wouldn't let him light on Cash either. What does that mean? Yeah, he won't let the buzzards land on Addie's coffin. Or now on Cash, since Cash is laying on Addie's coffin. All right? So, you know, he's kind of protecting them. And, you know, they ask Cash how he feels, and what is Cash's response? Whenever they ask Cash how he feels, how does he respond? Yeah, he says it doesn't bother him. You know, he suffers in silence. Cash suffers in silence. All right, and so then Vardaman tells us, you know, Cash has a broken leg. He's broken his leg before. He's had 2 broken legs. He's lying on this box with this quilt rolled up under his head and a piece of wood under his knee. All right. And so, you know, he's still kind of talking away about how Jewel has left with his horse and how Jewel and she were in the shed. The horse lives in the barn, and he's keeping the buzzards away. Okay. So, anyway, he's still kind of talking about all of this, and he is talking about how his mother is a fish. And now there are 10 of them in little, tall, black circles. 10 what?
Buzzards.
All right. Still kind of dealing with the idea that, you know, they smell. All right, so then in chapter 45, we have this chapter with Mosley. Who is Mosley? What is his role? What is his job? What is his job? He's a pharmacist. So what is important about his job? It relates to Dewey Dell and the fact that he can help her. All right, so she comes in and she's like, just like looking at him, making him feel awkward. He asks, you know, what can I do for you? Do you want to look at some toilet things, or is it medicine? She's like, yes, I want medicine. All right, so he thought maybe that someone had sent her in for something for female, and she was embarrassed to ask about it. All right. So, you know, she barely knows what it's for. You know, it's a shame, but whatever. And he says, well, what do you use? We have this and this. And then he looked back to the store. She said she would like to go to the back of the store because she does not want to mention it. And he was like, okay. So he's thinking she wants, like, some medicine for her skin or something. And so he's like, what do you want? Tell me what you want. I'm pretty busy. She says, I have female trouble. He says, oh, is that all? I thought maybe she was younger than she looked. And I said, well, where's your ma? She says, I haven't gotten one. She's out in the wagon. Okay, why not talk to her about it before you take any medicine? Any woman would have told you about it? How old are you? She says, I'm 17. All right, so we now know she's 17. Oh, I said, I thought you were maybe, he thought she was younger. Are you too regular or not regular enough? Talking about her menstrual cycle. And she says, yes, I reckon so. Well, which? Don't you know? All right, you want something to stop it? Is that it? She says, no, she said, it's already stopped. All right, so, you know, she's having some trouble kind of getting up. And he's like, well, what? And then he realizes that he's like, oh, you're not married. And she says, no. And he says, oh, I said, and how long has it been since it stopped? About 5 months, maybe? It ain't been but 2, she said. So now we know how far along she is. And this goes back to previously when she's talking about how like she knows she has something in her, but she can't feel it. You know? All right. And he says, well, I haven't got anything here for you unless it's a nipple, like a bottle. I advise you to go back and go home and tell your pa and to, you know, get that marriage license. And she says, well, I got some money to pay you. And he says, well, is it your own money or did he act enough a man to give it to you? And she says, well, he gave it to me. It's $10. He said that would be enough. And he said, $1,000 wouldn't be enough in my store and 10 cents wouldn't be enough. You take my advice and go home, tell your pa, your brothers if you have any, or any of the first man that comes along the road. So Mosley says, you know, no, that's not what I'm here for. Go home, tell your dad. All right? And she didn't move. She said, Laugh said I could get it at the drugstore. He said, to tell you, me and him would never tell nobody you sold it to us. And he said, well, I just wish your precious Laugh had come for it himself, because he would have put him in his place, basically. If he ain't have to Texas by now. And he says, you know, I'm a respectable druggist that's kept store and raised a family and been a church member for 56 years in this town. I have a good mind to tell your folks myself if I can just find who they are. All right? And so she looks at him, and it kind of continues on. So, in your questions, what does he refuse to give her? Medicine to terminate her pregnancy. All right, so then Mosley's chapter continues. It was Albert who told me about the rest of it. He said, the wagon was stopped in front of Grummett's hardware store with the ladies all scattering up and down the street with handkerchiefs to their noses. Why are they doing that? The smell. And a crowd of hard-nosed men and boys standing around listening to the marshal arguing with the man. He was kind of a tall, gaunted man sitting on the wagon saying it was a public street and he reckoned he had as much right there as anybody. And the marshal telling him he would have to move on. Folks couldn't stand it. It had been dead 8 days. So she's been dead 8 days in the summer and has been in the water. They came from someplace out in Yoknapatawpha County trying to get to Jefferson with it. It must have been like a piece of rotten cheese coming into an anthill. In that ramshackle wagon, Albert said folks were scared would fall to pieces before they could get it out of town. And with that homemade box, another fellow with a broken leg lying on a quilt on top of it, and the father had a little boy sitting on the seat, and a marshal trying to make them get out of town. It's a public street. We can stop. They had stopped to buy some cement. Why do they want some cement?
To cover, like barrier.
Huh?
To go to barrier.
Because they are going to make a cast out of cement for Cash's leg. Is that a good idea? No, a bad idea. All right? They wanted the cement to fix the fellow's broken leg somehow.
That's the part. You might use leg.